All right. Hello and welcome or welcome back to the Artist Statement Podcast. My name is Madeline Chesick Welch, and I am joined today with Kristopher Benedict. Hi.
Hello. Hi, Matt.
Um, Chris, will you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, general intros?
Sure. So I'm Kristopher Benedict. I am a painter, an artist, painter, person, and also a where we met is I'm a professor at Westchester University. I teach painting and drawing. There, yeah. Um,
Awesome.
my studio's in Philadelphia, and I live in the suburbs outside of Philly, in betwixt Westchester University and my studio.
Cool. What initially drew you into making art?
So I'm torn between giving like the quick easy answer and something long winded. The I think it was something that I have done is obviously like an early interest, right? Like most of us, I think I was really into drawing and like doing it. There's probably a time period where like a critical time period, early teen years, where it was something to do with um, escapism, something to do with having a like that became the way to kind of work out my problems or dodge problems or something like that. So it became a way of processing, I think. And I think that's sort of what drew me into it was the need to kind of process a lot of things, and art being a way that I like drawing became a way to do it. And these different, like I was really into comic books. I would say comic books were probably something that initially brought me into it. Um, uh, because of I just spend a lot. You could just sort of like hyper focus on it, spend a lot of time on it. Draws you into a kind of fantasy world away from your real life problems, but also becomes a way to kind of process and deal with those problems. Um, at the same time, like a lot of the problems were maybe some family related issues and sort of being feeling I guess as most teens do, sort of feel like maybe an outsider, or like you didn't belong in where I was, and then so art became a way to kind of see myself as being separate from that and a way out of that, maybe where I was able to kind of start to think about doing something meaningful with my life or something like that in a in that kind of teen angst kind of way.
Right.
That kind of drew me into it. But it was always so yeah, so that's I think where it started. Um, and then I got into a really good art school. I think when I was in high school, like around that, going into my senior year of high school, I didn't at all have any idea what an artist would do, and I liked drawing comic books, but I also liked playing music, and I thought I was a good writer. I was a horrible writer, but I thought I was really cool. And I thought I could do any number of these things, but I had a good high school art teacher, this guy Ward Lamb, and he had gotten a student or two into the Cooper Union in New York City. I grew up in New York State. I grew up in Middletown, New York, which is in Orange County, New York, which is about an hour and a half drive to like Manhattan, um, on the west side of the Hudson River. Um, and he had gotten some people into Cooper Union, and so he said that I should apply, and I did, and amazingly, I got in. I mean, I remember there's a couple of life moments that are real, like, um, really huge or life altering, and it's weird that you can be old and still remember them really, really clearly. But I remember getting that phone call and like being shocked that I got in, and I did. So that solidified things. And then moving from upstate to New York, and as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, like that really changed things and opened my mind up to a whole other world that I wasn't exposed to, and that's sort of the beginning of it. And the peers and my friends that I met at the time too were like nothing else. So that's sort of the start of it.
Awesome. So you spoke a little bit about going to Cooper Union, and then you went to Columbia after that,
Yeah.
correct? How do you think that your education affected your career in art making? Would you do things differently, or would you stay the same if you could go back?
Yeah, no, I would do things the same. I mean, I don't know. I went straight through, and I am an immature person. Even in my mid 40s, I'm an immature mid 40-year-old, and I was an immature 18-year-old when I got to undergrad. It took me uh, at least until my late sophomore year, early junior year before I took like even art school seriously. I was
Hmm.
not a good student at all. Um, and but I went straight through because I was because some of the better students in my school were going straight through to grad school. It seemed like the thing to do. I also felt like I was about to figure some things out just with the work, and I didn't want to stop the work. I wanted to continue. I didn't want to pause to like set up a studio and get a job and do that yet. I wanted to kind of keep building the practice. Um, and Yeah, and it was really hard. I when I got to grad school, I think I probably gave myself a harder time than any professors gave me a hard time, but I struggled for the first year for sure, and but got a lot out of it. A lot of what I learned from grad school came from my colleagues and peers, and really excellent, mentors and things. But a lot, much of it didn't actually like make sense to me until a year or two later when I kind of understood what they meant and could kind of process some of those lessons. But it helped my career a lot. I mean, they're both really outstanding programs, and I think the common thread between going to Cooper and going to Columbia is like when I got there, I had no idea. Sort of, I really was in the deep end without knowing how to swim, and I had to work really, really hard to catch up to what I perceived to be, catch up to my peers, in both places for different reasons, and so they both places really, lit a fire and made me and sort of forced me to work really hard and sort of confront what I didn't know and fill those gaps in on my own. A lot of it was like most of it in both places really self-directed, like teaching myself, pushing myself in a lot of ways. And then, ultimately, like that's the people I went to school with, they became my crew and they did really, really well for themselves career wise. Many of them did. And that definitely helped my, like what little measly shreds of a career I have had have come from, really that. And it's weird the sort of name recognition that comes with going to a good program. I think Columbia at the time had a bigger reputation than maybe like there. It was really like it was at that era. I went there right when it was sort of becoming an incredibly like hot school in quotes, and I don't know if I would have even gotten in if I had applied 2 years later because it became
Hmm.
such an intensely um, desirable place to go. And there were my mid-semester critique, my first semester, there's like galleries coming to the mid-semester critique at big name Chelsea galleries in New York, looking at the art and giving us feedback. And I don't know, it was really intense, but it definitely like um, definitely gave me some exposure. It definitely helped my career. It didn't hurt my career at all. um, in some ways it's sort of like, um, if anything, it would hurt by being sort of overexposed to this stuff
Mm.
at a too early of a developmental spot where like maybe there's some value in kind of like hiding out and really knowing who you are as an artist before you go through that ringer. I didn't have that chance. I had to process a lot of that stuff afterwards.
Um, to backtrack a little bit, you mentioned that you initially, when you were younger, were inspired a lot by comic books. To kind of piggyback off of that, where do you find inspiration now, and who are your current favorite artists?
Oh yeah, yeah. Like I feel like my interests have really been the same since I was a kid. Since I like in a weird way, I'm like really, really consistent in that way. Where like I like doing these things, and I've always liked doing these things. Um, and so like those like initial kind of influences that I had like during you know, being like a kid and being a teenager, going through school, like those things that kind of imprinted on me, they're still there, and still like, you know, big influences that I'm kind of working through. So like inspiration is kind of a funny one because, you know, you can trying to think of like what, like Charlene von Hale is an abstract painter, German abstract painter who was a mentor of mine in grad school.
Mm.
She's a great artist. She had a show maybe a couple years ago now, at Petzel Gallery in New York, and I think about that show all the time. And like I was saying, like after when you graduate, a lot of times you process those lessons later. Like she's still a voice that I hear like when I'm working in my own studio. Like I kind of she sort of shows up, you know, in like hologram form and like critiques my paintings as I'm working on them, you know. So
Yeah.
that's an influence for sure, you know, and like the creative process in general. I play music with my friend Todd Arsenault, and I collaborate on paintings with him, and sometimes in like that sort of influence. Like becoming a kind of influence on the work that I'm making now in the studio, just from the standpoint that like it separates itself from what we're doing collaboratively, um, and just, there's something about like about the process of kind of collaboration. Uh, my paint my paintings have a lot to do with sort of pitting different visual ideas against each other, different processes against each other, different approaches, like putting them in tension. And so in a lot of ways I kind of think about them as like different voices or different attitudes that are kind of conflicting in a painting. And um and so like I try to be like open to a lot of different like influences, from pretentious sounding things to really like, you know, like the colors that I saw, you know, on my shoe or something, you know what I mean? I don't know, like I try to
Mm-hmm.
be kind of open to a lot of different influences at different times, but I don't know if that answers the question very well. um Charlene von Hale is an artist that's influential that I can name. I'm thinking and looking at a lot of this guy Merlin James. Have you heard of Merlin James? Like
I
Merlin the Wizard.
maybe
James,
from you
Scottish
earlier.
painter. He's really
Yeah.
cool. Look at his stuff a lot. Um, yeah, I don't know, but I don't know. I'm trying to like. I think that I'm sort of influenced by like imagery and like, and so um, that imagery sort of. I collect a lot of images, and a lot of that has been screenshots. Probably the last 2 years, so I've been doing a lot of going back and looking at my screenshots and printing them out in black and white and trying to pull them up, and just see what kind of works when that works, what could work as a painting once the context is gone, like when you don't know even why you screenshotted some is that screenshot something, the context is gone, why did I even like that, what was I even looking at, what was I thinking about, you know, but then you have it and
Yeah.
it's floating around and maybe something can come out of it. I don't know, so that's sort of what's been influencing me now too, is the sort of like idea of trying to get my trying to not control the processes, like the, you know, trying to understand that the more authorship and control I put, the more I try to bracket what the thing is supposed to be about, or like point it in a specific direction, kind of the weaker the work tends to get. And actually, if
Mm.
I can just kind of like create a situation for the work where the stuff starts to kind of bubble up and happen, and if I'm like surprised or confused, then that's like a good spot for the work to be in.
Mm. Can you discuss a little bit more about your collaborative practices, especially with Todd Arsenal?
Yeah.
What does it take to make successful art with another person?
I don't know if it's successful. I mean, I think that's the thing. I think we both really like it because it's like it just takes the rules and like it just gets rid of the rules. So we, for your listeners or whatever,
Mm.
like what we do is, we we work on paintings in my studio space in Philadelphia, and one or the other of us will start them, and we'll just leave them in kind of a designated area in the studio where then the other person will come in and like work on it a little bit if we want, but we don't talk about them at all. We're not in this room at the same time. We don't say even when things are done. Like sometimes I'll think that something is done and he'll change it completely. And in a way, it's sort of like been really fun because it just takes the kind of ego out of it completely. Um, and it just turns your ego into like a voice or like a language. You know, it turns your desires for like what the thing is going to be into um, just another kind of aspect of the story or something. So it feels really like we're building these kind of funny fictions or these kind of funny worlds, or like, what could a painting be? You know, it's sort of the question, like, what could it be? Like, like, could it be anything? Does it need to, like, um, I don't know. So it's something that we, in a lot of ways, it's like playful. And I think that's the strength of it, is that it's really just sort of, um, it's about sort of proposing different ways of doing things and being playful with like narrative and storytelling and being kind of funny, you know, and also like kind of giving each other a hard time and you know, working with and against each other. And so I don't know. So it's but we don't really, we showed them once. We had one show of them, but we don't really have aspirations with them either, which is the
Mm.
other great thing about it, is that, you know, when I'm making my own work, I really want it to be good, and I want it to connect with what I made before, and I want it to be better than what I made before, and I want it to connect with people in a certain way. And you know, I have aspirations about what it's supposed to do in the world, and with this stuff I don't. With this stuff it's just
Mm.
like um, it's like a hobby. It's like they're like hobby paintings. They're
Mm.
like Sunday paintings, but that becomes great. Like that becomes what's fun about them, or like what becomes like, I think, enjoyable. Like there's like an entertainment quality to them that um, that I think works. What was this question? Oh, just the nature of the collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the nature of it. But Todd, I mean, I couldn't do it with anybody because I think we've played music together for years before we started collaborating, and so there's something, and a lot of it has been like sort of I guess like you call like improvisational music, or like kind of nonsense music too. So we have like a history of just kind of like being in tune while we're playing and messing around with each other. Um, and I think that our backgrounds are similar enough but different enough. Our visual languages as painters are kind of similar enough to be compatible, you know. Like we can both work, we're both kind of fast painters. I think we both are
Mm.
painters who are working between ideas about abstract painting and ideas about representational painting. um, so we have some similarities, but we also have we're not the same, and so those differences become really productive also. So how do you
Great.
do it with how do you collaborate with somebody? I think that's it. I think you have to have enough in common that you can, like, you know, that you can be in the same planet with the person, but you have to have enough differences so that like you're constantly surprising the other person.
Yeah. In terms of your individual practice, what does that look like for you? I know you mentioned your studio and how individually you kind of push yourself differently. And I might be recalling this wrong, but I think at one point you told me something about using cigarettes to motivate yourself to go to the studio, but I can't remember what the context was about that.
uh, well, it's sort of like I don't smoke anymore. But I think it was probably something about just getting there, like just getting to the studio, right?
Mm.
Yeah, that really is the hard part. Um, yeah, so the motivation is to sort of like you know, something to sort of get off the couch, to kind of like leave one world behind and kind of enter into this world of the studio. Um, it's like I think the direction of that like conversation is sort of about like navigating like life with versus studio life, you know, and how those things kind of work together, and trying to find some kind of like happy balance, or find a way to kind of make those things like work together. And I don't have an answer to that. It just doesn't. Like I just it's an impossible thing to do. Like that's like the story of like my life basically is like, and every artist's life I think is like, even if you're in there full time, you have to do shit that you don't want to do, you know what I mean? And there's like aspects of the profession that are not just shutting the door and making the artwork, you know. A lot of artists are actually very social people and really love that social side of you know, of making the work, connecting with people, going to openings, um you know, promoting, doing all the things to kind of get the work documented and kind of, you know, send it out, and you know, writing proposals and those kind of things. A lot of artists really enjoy that. A lot of them, you know, I would say I'm more in the camp of like, I wish that I could just kind of like be some kind of isolated genius, and I could just shut the
Mm.
door, and like, you know, people would you know, come and beg me for artwork, and I would tell them to like go away, like I'm busy working, you know, this kind of thing. But that's just not real. And so I've always had you know, so you have jobs and you have responsibilities, and you have responsibilities to the work and life responsibilities, all this kind of stuff. I don't know. It's hard. Yes. If you have to do some kind of, if you have to bribe yourself with drugs of any kind to get into the studio, I support it, you know, for a little while. Try to maintain, you try to be balanced and try to be healthy. Um, you know, I don't know. It's not, um, there's just no way to do it right. You know, there's no way to do it right. There's always, if you're thinking about your life in these kind of spheres, it's like you take from one, you know, you rob from one to kind of fill up the other balloon or something like that, and it's always really challenging. Um, the thing that brought me into teaching was this promise of kind of having more time, like like time over the summer, time over winter break. You know, teaching is relatively, it's like kind of lightweight compared to like a more physically taxing job, so you have more um, you know, you have more energy for the studio. And so that was one thing that I liked about teaching initially. But you know, it also like the mental toll takes another, you know, there's like the commitment to that becomes larger and larger too. So there's no right, I don't know, there's no way to do it right. I've kind of resigned myself to the fact that this will be an unhappy thing forever. I will never be happy
Mm.
with the amount of time, or the way to get myself to, like having enough studio time, or how it works with the rest of my life, or how it works with my job or my family. It's never going to be not a struggle, unfortunately. Um, and you know, maybe that's good, right? Like maybe maybe you'd rather an artist be have that perspective than be like, you know, like cool with it being, I don't know. There seems like there's never enough time.
Mm.
In the world, there's not enough time.
That answered a bunch of my questions that I
Okay,
had
good.
about
I feel like
things, so that's
I'm
perfect.
rambling, but yeah,
No, it was
that's yeah,
good.
yeah,
Um, I guess I don't know if you have any more to add on to this. You kind of answered it already, but how does your profession as a teacher primarily play a role in your art making? And do you feel like it inhibits you or inspires you, or is it kind of a mixed bag?
yeah. It's a mixed bag, of
Yeah.
course. Um, I really like a bunch of my students. I really like my colleagues currently at Westchester. Um, I think that like under best circumstances, that can be really inspiring. Just kind of being
Hmm.
around everybody and kind of seeing what they're doing, and being kind of put in, you know, being kind of pushed by what, you know, the people around you. So that's great. To teach something is like you have to kind of know it in a way that you don't, that I never knew it before. I mean, so
Mm.
I like, I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD until I was until my second or third year at Westchester. So until like,
Mm.
I was teaching for a little while, and like that was really radical in terms of like being medicated for that and how it allowed me to actually like intellectually connect with things that I had never done before. And so it was this real like it was pretty I think kind of the opportunity that teaching provides to like really study something in depth because you've taught it 3 or 4 times, and now you really know that that Robert Smithson essay or something, and you really know it like really really well. Um, and or like even just kind of like develop a course so that you are teaching people to learn how to paint, and you've taught it for now a decade, and so you kind of really feel like I there's a depth to that I never had before. And I think the fact that like I found the medication allowed me to actually like understand this stuff in a way that I had no
Hmm.
idea. I think I was really just like like firing off in all directions all the time, and sort of um, not able to see the forest for the trees in a way that I'm able to now, where I can actually get an idea of how um, uh, the different spheres of a liberal arts education kind of intersect in the art classroom, how an art education can help a student kind of move out into the world, the value of that. I definitely like when I started teaching, I really saw it as a I was very cynical, I think, much more cynical in a weird way. I'm going reverse, where I'm much less cynical today
Mm.
than I was when I first started teaching. And when I first started teaching, it was like it was a way to support my art practice. It was really, that was it. I like teaching. I like working with the people for sure, but it was a job, and nothing really more than that. Um, and I think as time goes on, I see it less that way and more as a kind of like something where I feel like um, my art practice I'm seeing it more as I'm struggling with it, but I'm looking more for a way to have that feel like something I'm doing for people rather than just trying to carve out a career. I'm trying to look for
Hmm.
ways that it connects to the world, it makes sense in the world, it has a role in the world. And I see teaching that way too. I see like teaching as something where I'm feeling like more like it has a place in the world, it's going somewhere, it has a function that I believe in, and not just about kind of supporting myself through it. So I think that's So I guess that there's a mixed to that. It doesn't really help or hurt the painting practice, but I think it's like there's like an overall sense of like it's I'm connecting to it in a more I'm connecting to it more, and I think
Yeah.
I think my relationship to it changes a lot over time.
Yeah. Um, this is a little bit of a sillier note, but as someone who was once your student, I was always so interested in hearing you tell anecdotal stories in the classroom.
Mm.
And I'm a teacher now, and I do that to my teens all the time, and it drives them insane. That being said, how does storytelling help you in teaching and art making? And will you tell the story of Egbert?
Oh damn, Egbert. Yeah. So Egbert is in upstate New York. You could Google Egg. Did I ever show you a picture of
You
Egbert?
did. It was so
Yeah.
scary, right?
That's really scary. So Egbert was like an animatronic talking like egg, like a Humpty Dumpty Christmas egg king figure. And they would put you and it was at a place called Devitt's Farm in New York State, somewhere in Orange County. I can't remember what the name of the town is. But they basically walk you through a farm that was decorated for Christmas as a little kid, and they would make you put a name tag on that said your name, and then there would, as you enter like the barn, the room in a barn where Egbert was like hanging out on his Egbert throne, there was somebody like hiding out who saw your name and was like, "Hello, little Christopher. What do you want for Christmas?" I I did some I should I've dug into Egbert since, since then, and I think he, of course, like it was like an 80s and 90s thing, but then I think they
Mm.
brought Egbert back, and
Oh,
they had
thank
like a
God.
2 or 3 year where Egbert, like, they gave him another shot, so there might be, there he might be out there still. um I'm very I can't, so like they don't teach, I went to art schools, so they don't teach you how to teach in art schools, you know what I
Right.
mean? And so like I'm so unqualified, and I have students that have like real problems. Like I have students with mental health problems, developmental problems. I have all sorts of really serious things that I'm supposed to solve, and I am so unqualified for that. I am just an artist, just a painter, and like a sort of a compassionate like I want to help people. I don't want people to have a bad time.
Right.
I want to help them learn, but uh so like I basically, when I started teaching, I kind of just tried to remember what people did in the, what I was taught and how I was taught. And then I would sort of remember how, I think one thing that helps me as a teacher is I was not a very good student for a long time. And so I failed all the time. And so like
Mm.
not literally failed the class, but I really like learned through making mistakes. And so I think a lot of my stories are just sort of different ways that I screwed things up, different ways to like, yeah. And I think that kind of helps, is that you kind of connect with students in the way where you're not this kind of, I never want to be like the authority figure telling you how to do things. I just wanted to kind of share my experiences with you. This is how you might want to do it. This is what you're thinking. This is what I would think about if I was you. When you say this, when you show me this thing, it reminds me of this time where I was scared of Egbert or whatever,
Right.
and that was like, and that's sort of how I teach. It feels a lot like when you asked me to interview here, I was like, yes, of course, because I love talking about myself, and I think a lot of teachers do, because so much of it is this kind of, you're like always trying to be careful not to like let you become some kind of egomaniac, because you're
Right.
you're the boss in the classroom, and so you're like, you know what I mean? Like you kind of really have to keep your ego in check. Um, because it can really run wild, and like I could literally tell stories or talk about myself all the time, and like it would be really, I would hate that if I was a student. So I have to, so storytelling does play a big role. I want to share all of my experiences with students the most I can, um, but I have to be careful not to overdo it. I
Mm-hmm.
think in my less humble teaching years, like when I was saying, when I was a little bit more cynical and kind of starting out, I really wanted to tell more stories, because I also wanted students to like know where I came from, and
Mm-hmm.
who they're talking to and that kind of thing. I think so much of it, a lot of times I felt like, they were not, respecting my authority. They didn't know who they were messing with. They didn't know that I had the background that I had, and they were not taking my word for things, or looking up the artists that I told them to, or something. I don't know. So storytelling does play a big role in that, because that is how the knowledge is passed down. Um, since there isn't necessarily a rule book, there isn't a
Yeah.
textbook.
I think there probably is, but they just didn't give it to us.
They don't give it to you. Yeah,
They gave it to
yeah.
the education majors, but not us.
There's a textbook. There are some bad textbooks for art. Like how to have an art career for dummies, and
Mm.
how to
Yeah.
draw still lifes. There's how-to books, how to draw horses.
Right.
A lot of good books on horse drawing. I've
Yeah.
studied, but not how to teach a diverse group of college students and keep them interested.
Yeah. Um, Kind of back on the painting track. When you are creating a painting, how important is the subject matter? Your paintings are often kind of like a mixed bag of like abstract and more subjective. So, what's your process in deciding that?
Yeah, it's always seemed interesting to me that people that your art viewer is going to look for what the representational imagery is in a painting first all the time, right? And that's definitely not my experience of painting or my experience of art. My experience of art is like, I'll get up to the surface first, I'll notice the color first, I'll notice kind of big shapes in the thing, and then, you know, um, connected to what the imagery is, and back and forth, and so that's really my experience of like looking at art. It's like never just a horse painting, you know what I mean? It's a painting that's kind of built up of a surface, and um, and there's more going on there. And so for me, I like to think about these different aspects of painting, and how I can kind of sometimes pit them against each other, or create tension that way, or I'll have motivations sometimes that are more about what um, what the imagery is, the source of the imagery. I'm making a painting now of the singer Nelly, his repossessed St. Louis mansion. And so that kind of drew me into it, the fact that it was this kind of like former like rapper, and then now there's this kind of dilapidated Tuscan village in the woods outside of St. Louis. It's like interesting subject matter. I
Yeah.
want to kind of make some paintings with that as the subject matter. But other times it'll be like, something where the motivations are color, like I want to make a really big blue painting, and how am I going to do it? Um, or a lot of times the initial the painting develops with an idea in mind for what the imagery is going to be, and then it kind of fails, or something more interesting kind of comes in through the side door, and I'll pursue that. And I don't know. So I think that there's like, um seen from like uh from like as a whole, like the art practice has a lot to do with landscape painting, and like a
Mm.
lot of times the actual like paint handling, and the build up of layers, and the way that sort of trying to create a sense of space in the painting. But like I'm always thinking spatially in terms of like creating some depth, and then balance, like counteracting the depth with flatness. A lot of those thoughts I think comes from a kind of landscape painting vocabulary. Um, the more abstract paintings, the paintings that have less clear representational clues in them, I'm usually thinking about them spatially in terms of being some kind of landscape. Um, but it really, the motivation for each painting I tend to purposely kind of look for different motivations for paintings rather
Mm.
than kind of be consistent. I talked earlier about the sort of collecting imagery. I think that's one part of like where the images come from, is this kind of nonstop collecting of pictures, and sort of letting them kind of hang out in the studio and relate to the paintings that are happening. And the context is sort of the larger group of paintings as they develop. That's sort of what ultimately kind of drives the individual paintings, is sort of what's going on with their friends around them.
In terms of, you were talking about trying to like do differing things. Your color palette seems like pretty consistent from your early work into your current work. Has that been like a conscious choice, or is it like what you're drawn to, or
Yeah, no, if
anything of the
anything,
sort?
it's like it's um it's not a conscious choice. I consciously try to not work with the same color
Yeah.
palette, and it's really a drag. I notice it many times where like I'm falling into old kind of color mixing habits, or that kind of thing. I think part of the process is that I'm doing what I just spoke about, which is I'm working in a lot of layers, right? And I'm also not very clear about what the end result is going to be. I purposely want to leave these things kind of open propositions for as long as I can. And
Mm.
so, when I'm layering one palette, and then I layer a different color palette on top of it, and then something else, ultimately it sort of does kind of head towards a certain kind of like a certain type of color preference, or a kind of like place that kind of makes sense, a place of like resolve that kind of makes sense to me, that
Yeah.
winds up being, I guess, pretty like uh, pretty consistent. I mean, I guess that's the thing, is like the further I try to go from um the further I try to push away, a lot of times it just the same thing sort of tends to reoccur. It's the same thing with drawing. Like my hand, I think, for a long time I tried to hide the comic book drawing origins of my line, and I can't. And ultimately, it just keeps coming through. I keep seeing it over and over again, and so you sort of just have to own it. Um, the color, I want it to be kind of destabilizing. I want it to be kind of dreamy. I want it to be kind of not a little like maybe like a little synthetic, like a little Hanna Barbera kind of cartoon, like um, little synthetic feeling. Sometimes I have like preferences for it, and I want it to be jar. I want them to not also sit super easily. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like when I think about I think about um, like taste has a lot to do with painting and color. I think taste, home decorator, interior decorator, taste things. And I kind of like, I think for a lot of my time making art, like didn't, I didn't trust that I had very refined good taste. And so I wanted to make things in bad taste, or I wanted to
Mm.
use color that was kind of going to be annoying or like edgy, like just not fit right, like make people feel like something is not sitting correctly. um, something that has a little like dissonance, color that has some
Yeah.
dissonance to it. And so that's something that I take kind of seriously. I think I probably, now talking to you, I probably could give making some, harmonious, sensual, beautiful, nice paintings a try and see how I could do. At this point, I should probably have some decent taste. But yeah, my go to is to try to be like a little annoying. Like, what's the wrong color to put in there that'll kind of turn everything around and make it a little
Yeah.
uncomfortable. I guess I like that about the color that I use.
Yeah. Um, in terms of the way that you name your work, you
Mm.
have like a real range of titles from new work to The Rat Retires from the
Oh
World.
yeah, yeah.
How do you go about choosing names for your pieces?
Um, I I've tended to think about the body of work more than the individual piece, right? And so, like, The
Mm.
Rat Retires from the World is a fable by La Fontaine, and I did a body of work about that. That was kind of riffing off of some of the ideas in that fable. Um, and so, like, a lot of times, the body of work will get
Mm.
title for a show. Um, Uh, I imagined, I thought I saw a friend of mine who had died on the street of Dickinson in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And that led to me making a show called Fake Your Death. And it was like sort of
Mm.
some of these ideas that kind of coalesced with that. When I moved to the suburbs, I did a show called Tree Streets, and because the streets were named after trees, and they were kind of these kind of abstracted suburban landscapes or something. Um, and so yeah, so the language becomes really important. Like so um, when I'm developing a body of work and experimenting, I'm kind of looking for a bit of language that will kind of bring the work together. Once I find the word tree streets, once I find that the I had a show called Tapestry Riff, and I thought of riffing, like in guitar riffing and tapestries, and and these things start to come together, and then it really helps me create the body of work once I get that bit of language. So language becomes really, really important for me there, because then I can start to kind of, I sort of feel like I know how to talk about the work that I'm making, and I know how to think about it, and then I could work with it and against it, and develop a conversation in the body of work. Much more than the individual painting. The individual titling individual paintings is really just like trying to not title it in a way that's going to turn anybody off from it, I guess. And like
Mm.
that's going to be like, sometimes it'll be like what I see, what I'm trying to paint, and what I'm trying to hope that the viewer is seeing in it, because I'm aware that it's probably obscured. Sometimes I try to keep it really basic, like, view of the park, or figure by the pond or something. Um, Sometimes I hedge my bets by leaving something untitled, but then in parentheses give it like my actual title.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just my way of like, I don't really want to name it that, because that might be an annoying title, but I don't know. It's kind of a mess. The titling of the individual paintings is kind of a mess. And I don't think anybody is going to I don't think there's much meaning to be gleaned from the title itself, but maybe the body of the name of the body of the work, yes.
Okay. In terms of like on the topic of language, you spoke earlier about how you thought that you were really good at writing at one point, and then we were talking about titles. I remember you telling me something about artist statements, about how
Yeah.
your first artist statement was like an absolute wreck. How, like, have you, I'm trying to think of how to word it. Like, how have you evolved your artist statement and like teaching artist statements throughout the years? And like, what would be your words of advice to someone writing them
Yeah.
now?
It's so great to be able, like, you're a great writer. It's such a nice such a nice skill set for an artist to have, to be able to
Mm,
write. Like, to be able to articulate and represent yourself well in writing is such a great skill to have. Um, um, I think you want to, where I have fallen down has been on the pretentious side of things.
mm,
I've erred on the side of being pretentious way too much, and I didn't even know I was being at the time, and then it just turns out, after rereading it, that it's crazy pretentious. My writing now for artist statements, for um, um, I'm applying to a lot of residencies currently, so like
mm,
residency proposals and this kind of thing. It's really, really cringe inducing for me. I can't. I like. I do my best and I take it really seriously, and then I read it back and I'm like, oh, like, this is so bad. So my advice is basically to like try to be as conversational as possible, try to be as clear with your ideas as you can, and then have other people read it and give you feedback. For me, it's like, nobody wants to read my shit, nobody wants to give me feedback, but at least I can go. But I know that, like, if I go back to it, I'll catch it. So that's the
mm.
thing, is like, now that I'm applying for like my sixth residency application, like, it's just every time I'm like revising and it gets a little bit better, and I'm kind of
Yeah.
figuring out. So, I think it's actually sort of like how time works into it is really useful. It's like, just give it some time, don't try to write it the night before, take your time with it, realize that it's a professional tool, it doesn't have to be clever. um, but yeah, it's a struggle. I'm very jealous of artists who can write well and who can articulate what they're doing really well. Um, it's not easy.
Um, Kind of a two-parted question coming up. We spoke briefly about how you are a musician, and I want to know about how music and art kind of interact in your daily life, and how like you find things expressed in one, like do you find them expressed in the other? But also like what other mediums do you like to work in? So
Yeah.
it's kind of long-winded, but
No, no, that's great. So I loved music probably even before, like, probably at the same time, or like my entire life. Like, I played in bands in high school. I sort of play, I make recordings now, and mess around with it all the time. It's very much like a hobby, and I like it in the world of being a hobby. Like, I would love to put it in front of as many people as possible, and I used to be much more like shy about it, or try to keep it like under wraps, because I was very embarrassed and I didn't want it to like change how people saw like my artwork if they heard like some of this like kind of goofy music that I was making. But I could care less now. like whatever, I'm happy to share
Hmm.
it. Not that it's, not that I have any, but I just don't really have any pretentious or aspirations about it. I just like doing it. And it's like the way that maybe doctors or some people like to golf, I like to play
Mm.
music, and it's fun. um, and so it's really different that way. I wish I could have that much fun. Maybe the collaborative paintings are a little bit of us trying to do some of that, try to get that sense of like, just like, fuck it, let's have fun, let's play, let's like it doesn't have to be anything other than just like entertaining, um
Yeah.
so there's that to it. Music is like really um like it's an emotional thing or something like that. Like I like if you were saying before we started that that you got caught up in a Rothko painting. I've had that experience with paintings for sure, but I cry on a daily basis to music. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like if I'm making coffee in the morning and I hear a certain Neil Young song in my head, it's not even in the world. I just imagine it, like I'm like tearing up. Um
Yeah.
and so like to me that's the thing. It's like this outlet. It's like
Yeah.
the same reason, like just at a young age I learned to play guitar, and when stuff was happening in my life that I didn't like, that was a nice thing to go do to, you know to get it together, and it still works that way for me now. And yeah, yeah, so that's it. I think there's something where like if I'm feeling really good about the music that I'm making, it really helps the paintings and vice versa.
Mm.
So that's cool. So it's totally like it's something where like if you can turn on the faucet in one area, it helps all the other areas too. And if you're feeling like constipated in one area, then you're constipated across the board, unfortunately.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would want people to know that they wouldn't be able to just by looking at your art
Hmm. About me?
in general?
uh, I have a lot of things that I want people to know, but not really about me. I don't know.
Mm.
I don't know. I don't know. It's I mean, it's been really fun talking, and like I don't get a chance to talk about like, I guess studio visits are another sort of outlet where you can kind of talk about yourself, or kind of like think about how these different aspects of your life kind of work into the artwork that you make and all that kind of thing. But I mean, painting is kind of designed to tell the story on its own, like I think with the painting, and I mean, I guess I would say I wish people could see it in person as
Mm.
opposed to off of a website or off of their phone on Instagram. If you see them in person, it's a different experience, not just with my paintings, but with all paintings. So that's
Absolutely.
what I would speak to. Is I would urge everybody to prioritize that in-person physical experience. See it in person, touch it with your eyes, be in the space with it. It's an object. Same as people. People are in the world. People are physical people. You can treat them like they're actually, you know, existing in three dimensions. And I think that would solve a lot of the world's problems too. Is like if we just understood physical space. Yeah. Yeah. So I
Absolutely.
would want people to do that. See it in person. See art in person.
My final question for you is what are you most excited for your future art making practices or events, and what's next?
Yeah. Um, I am applying for residencies now, so I have sabbatical from my job coming
Yay.
up in the spring, which is great. I've been
Good
there 10
stuff.
years, so I need it. Um, my first sabbatical. So I'm applying to a lot of residencies now, and I hope to land a good one that I'll and get some time away from my routine and see what that does. Routine is really um, something to me. I'm really interested in the idea of like routine, and like routine is really great for a painter because like there's something about the repetition of showing up. The work kind of changes, things kind of evolve. Like it's not about like it's really about that. It's about that kind of repetition, but at the same time, you know um I'm really hungry for meeting some new people and having some new conversations and seeing what other directions the work could go. I mean, am like a homebody and somebody who I think I really like that idea of like just kind of holding myself up in the studio and being a little isolated. That's sort of really good for me. I like being alone. I like kind of working alone, and but you need. I think I'm at a spot where I really very much need some new information and some new experiences and that kind of thing. So that's what I'm really looking forward to, is to try to get out a little bit more and put myself into some different situations in the spring. And then there will be a show, probably at Westchester, I guess, at least a show at Westchester coming up in like this time next year. That'll be kind of new work. So that'll be some in theory. I'm working towards that. I'm looking for a way to. I kind of dodged this part of your question earlier, but um, I have like a very I have a way that I'm used to working on my paintings that I think is becoming like it's like a methodology, you know what I mean? That
Mm.
I think can translate outside of painting now. I feel like I firmed up that methodology enough that I can look for ways to translate that into a different, maybe a different art discipline or something like that. And so I'm looking for ways to kind of expand the painting, and hopefully this exhibition will show some of the results of that, whether it's video, whether it's like music being incorporated into the experience a little bit more, whether it's just a kind of like online catalog that I'm thinking of,
Mm.
that maybe some of these things can kind of work together. I don't know. I'm kind of a little bit. I feel like this. I love the fact that painting has this need for a kind of physical in-person experience, but I'm also dissatisfied by the fact that it's so hard to create that experience with
Hmm.
the people I know. You know, I'm making the work for
Yeah.
my friends and colleagues, and you know, uh, you know, an audience that would hopefully see it, and I'm looking for ways to maybe look, yeah, to either create more of a physical experience and more of an in-person experience and create more of an environment, or find a way to translate it through the kind of, I guess, more less I guess through less traditional um, presentation forms, or maybe both. But yeah, so
Yeah.
there's a lot that I'm kind of. I mean, I think it's fun in these cases to kind of talk about what I do and present that, but it's really in flux at the moment, and it's been in flux probably always. You know what I mean? And but
Yeah.
I'm definitely like not at a spot where I'm like resting on my laurels, thinking about how wonderful the artwork is. I feel like
Yeah.
it's struggle, and I really want. I'm sort of dissatisfied at the moment with how it's coming across, and I'm looking for ways to kind of um, to get it, yeah, to get it across differently or to change. It's really hard to change when you're older, and so I'm like hoping the sabbatical does it, but I think it's sort of time for a little bit of a reboot. So we'll see. So I'm looking forward to
Absolutely.
that. That's where the energy's going now.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on my podcast and trusting me to interview you
Yeah.
blind. I will have your Instagram and website linked below for people who are listening. And then the artist statement podcast Instagram will also be linked below. Thank you so much for coming again, Chris.
Thank you.
And
This was great.
yeah,
Appreciate your time.
absolutely. Definitely. And everyone tune in next time.